Capsules of the Stargate. Chapter 2. As Colonel John Shepard settled into the command chair of the Daedalus, Rodney and Rodek worked feverishly on the adjacent control panel, their fingers flying across the touch screens. Rodney's brow was furrowed in concentration, his mind whirring with calculations and equations as he aimed to fine-tune the wormhole drive. Rodek, on the other hand, wore a more relaxed expression as he observed Rodney's frantic pace. His fingers lingered on a few buttons, making minor adjustments, bringing an air of calmness into the room. It was as if his more measured approach was injecting a dose of practicality into the chaotic mayhem that was unfolding before them. Meanwhile, Colonel John Shepard had taken the Daedalus back to Earth and left Atlantis. His calm and assertive aura radiated through the bridge, and the team around him responded immediately. He had a clear vision of their end goal and trust in the two scientists who were working tirelessly to get Atlantis back to Earth to engage with that super hive wraith ship. John had his own mission once he had gotten back to Earth by way of the Daedalus to get those F-302s armed with nuclear warheads. The clock was ticking, and time was of the essence. Every second that passed brought the wraith closer and closer to Earth. John had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this was no exception. His mind raced with thoughts of his family and friends on Earth and how he needed to protect them all at all costs. He heard that the Apollo was already damaged by the super hive wraith ship that was approaching Earth. John's grip tightened on the controls, his mind focused on the task at hand. He couldn't let fear or worry get the best of him now. He had to lead his team with confidence and conviction. Back on Atlantis, Rodney and Rodek were deep in thought, their minds racing with calculations and theories. Their fingers danced across the control panel, each of them focused on the task at hand. Rodney's mind was filled with numbers and calculations, his intellect driving him forward. The anticipation was palpable, but Rodney wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Rodek, on the other hand, brought a sense of levity to the situation with his light-hearted demeanor. They worked together seamlessly, two parts of a whole, like a well-oiled machine. Rodek glanced over at Rodney, his dark eyes shining with determination and admiration for his Canadian friend. "You know, McKay, I have never seen anyone work as hard as you do." Rodney snorted, his eyes never leaving the control panel in front of him. "Well, someone has to save the day, Rodek. Besides, this is what I do best." Rodek chuckled, a fond smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, I know." As they worked, the tension between them was palpable. They both knew that the fate of Atlantis, and indeed the entire galaxy, rested on their shoulders. Meanwhile John, Tilla, Stephen, Dr. Kavanaugh and Ronan were arriving back on Earth. Lieutenant Colonel Samantha Carter was waiting for his arrival. She had been hurriedly preparing for this moment, with the future of Earth hanging in the balance. Every second counted. As the Daedalus landed, she could feel her heart race in anticipation, and the mixture of adrenaline from knowing what was at stake filled her veins. Suddenly she saw Shepard appearing from the ship's hatch, with determination etched into his facial features. Shepard had a quick word with Samantha, updating her on the status of Atlantis and its current predicament. She listened attentively, her hazel eyes never leaving his face, absorbing every detail, and forming a plan of action. Meanwhile back on Atlantis, Rodney and Rodek were finally making significant progress with the ancient device's wormhole drive. They exchanged a brief triumphant look before returning to their tasks, checking, and double-checking the readouts on their tablet's activation sequence. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Rodney let out a triumphant cry, "It's ready. The wormhole drive is ready." He looked over at Rodek, his eyes shining with excitement and pride. Rodek smiled, equally pleased with their accomplishment. "Congratulations, Rodney. We did it." The two scientists shared a heartfelt high five, marking the culmination of their efforts. Meanwhile, As John Shepard received the good news from Samantha Carter, he couldn't help but smile. Their plan was coming together, and everything seemed to be falling into place. With Atlantis on its way to Earth, John and his team were ready to engage the super hive wraith ship with their arsenal of nuclear-armed F-302s. They had trained for this moment, and John was confident in their ability to protect their home world. Samantha moved swiftly, gathering her equipment, and coordinating tactics with the rest of the SGC team. The Earth was about to face one of its most significant threats yet, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to ensure humanity's survival. Back on Atlantis, Rodney and Rodek's jubilant mood was quickly replaced with a renewed sense of urgency. The task at hand was far from over. They had to make sure that the Atlantis re-entry into Earth's orbit didn't attract unwanted attention from the Wraith. Meanwhile, on the Daedalus, Colonel John Shepard stood with Samantha Carter, who had quickly joined his team in their mission. John and Samantha had a long history together from their shared days at the SGC, and he couldn't help but feel relieved to have her by his side. Her calm and collected demeanor were a perfect complement to his own intensity. Together, they strategized the best way to use the F-302S fighters, ensuring that they were fully armed and prepared for battle. With Woosley back on Atlantis, he had made the plans earlier to send Tila and Ronan upon the Daedalus to try to attempt to sabotage the Super Hive Wraith ship, while Rodney was staying on Atlantis to get the wormhole drive working. He hoped that with their skills they might be able to give Shepard an edge in the upcoming battle. At the same time, back on Earth, Samantha Carter and Colonel John Shepard had already set to work on arming the F-302S fighters, every second counting and as precious as a diamond. As Samantha, a seasoned science officer and weapons expert, busied herself with overseeing the loading of nuclear warheads onto the small fleet of F-302s, John kept a watchful eye on the monitors and sensors tracking the Wraith Hive ship's advance. "Colonel Shepard," Samantha's voice cut through the tension. "Yes, Major Carter," John replied, turning to face her. "The F-302s are prepped and ready for launch." The Super Hive ship was already in lunar orbit, its menacing form a looming reminder of the threat they faced. Samantha Carter's announcement was a small victory in the face of an imminent, catastrophic battle. Everything hinged on their success, and Colonel John Shepard couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. But he pushed his doubts aside, choosing to focus on the task at hand instead. "All right, let's get this show on the road," he said, his eyes burning with determination. Samantha nodded, and the two of them made their way to the Daedalus flight deck, where the F-302s were already lined up and ready to go. The pilots, a mix of SGC veterans and Pegasus Galaxy explorers, were strapped into their cockpits, awaiting their orders. As John gave the final go-ahead, the F-302s roared to life, their engines unleashing a cacophony of sound and fury. Within moments, the fighters were in the air, streaking towards their adversaries with breakneck speed and precision. Their mission was clear: to close in on the monstrous Hive ship and disable its engines, sending it careening off course before it could reach Earth. Colonel John Shepard watched, tense with anticipation, as the play-by-play unfolded before him in real time. As a veteran military man, he was accustomed to leading from the front and taking calculated risks. He had always relied on gut instinct and the finely honed skills of his team, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling of apprehension. During the battle, John's gaze flickered between the screens displaying the approaching Wraith ship, the pilot's feedback, and his loyal team standing beside him. Their confidence in him was palpable, buoying his spirits and steadying his nerves. Dr. Radek Zelenska, McKay's second-in-command, possessed a more relaxed demeanor. Dr. McKay had tapped his comm badge and told Richard Woosley aboard Atlantis, "We are ready to give this wormhole drive a go, Richard." After a brief pause, Richard's voice crackled over the speakers, "Very well, Dr. McKay. I wish us both good luck on Atlantis." Rodney and Radek exchanged a brief look, each reading the determination and tension of the other in their eyes. As they started to ready themselves and the drive for ignition, a sudden realization struck Rodney. "Rodek, did you remember to input the final set of calibrations?" Rodek nodded. "Of course, Rodney. I wouldn't dream of forgetting that crucial step." Rodney let out a sigh of relief, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He trusted Rodek with his life and the fate of Atlantis, but the weight of the situation bore down on him like a heavy iron cloak. "All right, let's give this a try," Rodney said, holding his breath as he input the final sequence of codes and initiations into the activation device. "Here goes nothing," Rodek said, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The countdown timer on their tablet monitor began ticking down quickly, as they exchanged one last worried glance before bracing themselves for the activation of the ancient wormhole drive. Rodek's eyes never wandered far from the monitor, watching as the power levels increased rapidly. The anticipation was palpable, and they could feel the vibration in the floor beneath them, building up with every passing second. Rodney and Rodek held their breath, waiting for the outcome of their actions. With a burst of energy, the wormhole drive was activated. A shimmering swirl of light appeared in front of them, signaling their success. "Yes. We've done it!" Rodney exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "We're on our way back to Earth." Dr. Rodek Zelenska couldn't contain his relief and satisfaction either. He grinned widely at Rodney, clapping him on the back enthusiastically. But there was no time for celebration. They had to move quickly to initiate the jump through the ancient device's wormhole drive, which would transport Atlantis back to Earth. As they prepared for the jump, Rodney couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and satisfaction. He and Rodek had done it again. They had pushed the boundaries of scientific knowledge and bent the fabric of reality to their will. But there was no time to bask in the glow of their success. They had a mission to complete, and failure was not an option. F-302s were already in battle against the Super Hive Wraith ship, except that the powerful Asgard beam weapon only had inflicted minor damage to the Super Hive Wraith ship. They needed to hold off the Wraith ship until Atlantis arrived in Earth's orbit, using the wormhole drive to surprise the Wraith. John Shepard's eyes blazed with a fierce determination, and he was confident of their success. "Keep focused. We must hold them off just a little bit longer," he urged the pilots. The Wraith ship was much more powerful than expected, and they were determined to show the Pegasus Galaxy their might. But Earth was humanity's home, and they couldn't afford to lose it. All around him, the Daedalus shook with the impact of weapon fire, and the sound of alarms filled the bridge. Colonel John Shepard gritted his teeth and clenched his fists, his knuckles white against the console. He glanced over at Samantha Carter, who was calmly coordinating their defense with the SGC back on Earth. Her eyes met his, and he could see the fierce determination in them. They had trained for this, prepared for this, and they would not back down, and the Daedalus had taken a bit of damage by that Super Hive Wraith ship. Wraith darts were already battling with the F-302s, and they were doing whatever they could to stop them. The 302s were well equipped to face Wraith opponents, but not ones as powerful as this. The darts had always been quick and agile, able to escape harm's way at a moment's notice. The pilots of the F-302s were experts in combat, but this was no ordinary battle. They never faced such a powerful Wraith Hive ship before. But they all had a shared purpose, a determination that kept them fighting even when it seemed like all hope was lost. The F-302s persisted, their agile fighters weaving in and out of the Wraith darts in a mesmerizing dance of death, each pilot skillfully avoiding the acidic projectiles and stunners that threatened to rip them apart. Meanwhile, breathless tension had befallen Rodek and Rodney as they initiated the ancient device's wormhole drive for the very first time on board the Atlantis. They were already traveling through the wormhole drive and would be soon entering Earth's orbit. The taste of success still lingered on Rodney and Rodek's lips as they marveled at the shimmering band of light surrounding the ancient city. They were finally coming home. The prospect was almost too exhilarating to process. As the journey continued, their anticipation was almost unbearable. The usual hum of concerned chatter and mental calculations had, for once, been silenced. Their thoughts dwelled on what awaited them on the other side of this momentous gateway. Meanwhile, Carson Beckett was ready to take over the Ancient's chair to defend Atlantis, as he was one of the crew members that had the Ancient's gene in him, and John Shepard was the other one. They had the power to tap into the Ancient's technology effortlessly, and this had saved their lives and the city multiple times. Carson had a beep in his earpiece as Rodney and Rodek announced their successful activation and had initiated the Atlantis jump through the wormhole drive. The Ready Room's monitors displayed live feeds of Atlantis, shrouded in the shimmering wormhole drive, streaking rapidly towards Earth, with the monstrous wraith ship inching closer and closer by the second. Once the arrival of Atlantis, Richard Woosley had Major Lorne take Rodney McKay over to the Daedalus to meet with Ronan and Tilla to rig up detonation to nuke that super hive wraith ship by remote control, but they first needed get on board of that wraith ship. But this was not over yet, as Rodney was part of the team with Ronan, Tilla, and Major Lorne to board that super hive wraith ship. Woosley wanted Rodney to set up a remote detonation device to nuke that wraith ship. As Colonel John Shepard watched Atlantis appear through the wormhole, his heart swelled with pride and relief. He knew this was just the beginning, and they had a lot of work to do to save Earth. Samantha Carter, who had been observing the events unfolding on the Daedalus, turned to John with a steady and resolute expression. "All right, John, we're ready to proceed with the plan. We have the F-302s armed and ready to drop their payloads on the wraith ship." John nodded, his eyes fixed on the super hive ship. "Good, Major Carter. I'll contact Rodney and the rest of the team to ensure they're ready to board that ship." As he spoke, he noticed a flicker of light in the distance, signaling the arrival of Atlantis. Rodney's team, comprised of Tilla, Ronan, and Lorne, were already gearing up for their mission to board the wraith ship. Woosley was in control of the Atlantis, trusting the team in front of him to carry out the dangerous mission ahead. Richard signaled Major Lorne, who sprang into action, leading the team aboard Atlantis and towards the wraith ship by way of the Stargate. Once entering through the Stargate, they suddenly appeared aboard that super hive wraith ship. Rodney's team's objective was to rig up explosives inside a safe and convenient location aboard the wraith ship that would allow them a safe escape. Hence, Rodney, Tilla, Ronan, and Major Lorne embarked on the mission, creeping cautiously through the narrow hallways and dimly lit corridors. The interior of the behemoth wraith ship was coated in grotesque, mottled flesh, and it shuddered with the wet sloshing of liquid organic systems. It wasn't easy. Even as Rodney had been placing detonation device to nuke this ship, Ronan was already in battle with a few of the wraith warriors. Tilla used her keen senses to disable the security systems, paving the way for Major Lorne to set the devices. Sweat dripped from their brows, and their hearts raced with a heady mix of fear, adrenaline, and pure determination. Rodney's mind raced as he worked, attempting to complete his task as quickly as possible. The wraith were vicious and cunning opponents, their inhuman beauty as alluring as it was terrifying. It was not the first time that Rodney, Rodek, Tilla, and Ronan were pitted against these creatures. But the wraith never failed to fill each of them with a seething, unquenchable loathing. They'd had countless encounters with wraith before, but never on this scale, never as alarmingly challenging and dangerous as this. Back on the F-302s fighting with the wraith darts, Major Carter and Colonel John Shepard were coordinating a defensive strategy against the horrifying wraith threat. The air was thick with tension, and the scent of anticipation was almost overwhelming as they waited for Rodney and his team to complete their mission ahead. Major Lorne was anxiously looking at his watch, impatient to get back to Earth and away from the disgusting, pulsating flesh ship that surrounded them. Meanwhile, aboard Atlantis, Dr. Radek Zelenska found himself fidgeting restlessly in his lab coat, his fingers trembling as the gravity of their mission weighed heavily upon him. Beckett was using the Ancient's chair to use the weapons aboard Atlantis to attack some of these wraith darts. At the exact moment, Rodney and his team finally finished planting the explosives on board the Super Hive wraith ship. It was a terrifying and gruesome mission, but they had succeeded. Rodney signaled Major Lorne, who immediately contacted Colonel John Shepard. Rodney and the team have successfully planted the explosives. The countdown to detonation begins now, reported Major Lorne. John nodded. Copy that, Major Lorne. Get back to Atlantis right away. But one of the Wraith warriors was attempting to kill Rodney, except Ronan ended up killing that Wraith and Ronan ended up getting stabbed in the back and died in the corridor. Tilla's eyes filled with tears, but the team pressed on, sprinting for the Stargate, determined to return to Atlantis and escape the doomed Wraith ship. Major Lorne instructed Rodney to jump into the Stargate, leaving behind no trace. The instant Rodney disappeared through the Stargate, Tilla and Major Lorne were entering through the Stargate when the remote control triggered the massive explosion aboard the Wraith ship. The team watched in awe as the base of the colossal vessel exploded in a fiery cataclysm. Tilla, although grief-stricken from the tragic loss of their comrade, was grateful for their survival. As the Atlantis had crashed into the Pacific Ocean, John Shepard brushed his jet-black hair out of his hazel eyes with a sigh of relief. Well, that was one hell of a welcome party. Samantha Carter chuckled, filled with a sense of appreciation. Meanwhile, back another wraith ship in which one of the darts had taken Ronan's body to this other wraith ship and they had revived him and brought him back to life to question him. They needed to find out how a team of 5 had managed to destroy one of their Super Hive ships. Although weak, Ronan's willpower and need to protect his colleagues had his mind thinking up ways to always protect his team, even when all hope seemed lost. "Ah, my dear, big friend," cooed a wraith queen who stood over Ronan's limp body. Her voice was both melodic and chilling, like the songs of the sirens in Greek mythology. Ronan's mind raced with raw instincts: protect, fight, escape. But the seductive allure of her voice left him paralyzed, unable to resist her will. The Wraith Queen's hypnotic voice surged through every fiber of his being, drawing out secrets he had only shared with his closest companions. Secrets about Atlantis, the nuke, and their area of operation while they were aboard that Super Hive wraith ship. The Wraith Queen was curious about this group of humans that had successfully destroyed one of her most powerful warships, and the information ponied up under her control was priceless for the Wraith as it helped them come up with a counter-strategy. Ronan could only grit his teeth and bear with the excruciating toll exacted upon him, crippled under the Wraith Queen's enchantment. It took all his willpower to remain strong, silently vowing revenge against these humanoid monsters who fed off innocent humans for their own survival. Eventually Ronan was able to overcome her and now he was planning for his escape off this wraith ship, but he needed to get over to the communications to get a message out to Colonel John Shepard. The other wraiths had been distracted with the arrival of another ship, and it was the perfect opportunity for Ronan to slip away without being noticed. As he crawled through the damp corridors, he hoped that his message would be in time to warn Atlantis and the rest of the team on Earth about the incoming wraith threat. Back on Atlantis, the team had gathered to mourn the loss of their comrade and strategize the next steps, but then Shepard ended up getting the message from Ronan that Wraith had revived him and that he was aboard one of the Wraith ships. Tilla began wiping tears from her eyes after she heard the message coming from Shepard's highly tablet device and heard Ronan's voice. Her heart constricted with worry, but she knew precisely what she had to do. She would reach out to their allies and tell them about Ronan's predicament. Tilla swallowed a surge of sorrow and put her brave face on, addressing Shepard with a solemn voice and colorful facial expressions. "Colonel, I believe it's time to activate our alliance with the Travelers and the Vanir. They would be able to assist us in Ronan's rescue mission, especially since they owe us for saving their people during the time crisis in the past." Shepard's brow furrowed in deep thought as he weighed the consequences of their next move. Tilla, I agree. Once the repair work was completed with Atlantis sitting on top of the Pacific Ocean, they were ready to rescue Ronan. Tilla had reached out to their allies, and now they were working together with the Travelers and the Vanir to plan a rescue mission. Even Rodney aboard Atlantis was happy to hear that Ronan was alive. No matter the circumstances, he decided he was going to rescue him as soon as possible. The prospect of working alongside the alien races filled Rodney with scientific intrigue and excitement, despite the dire situation. The rescue team had the best F-302 pilots holding the fort. John Shepard, Samantha Carter, and Abraham Ellis were tasked with transporting the rescue team and the unmarked puddle jumper. And Rodney himself was one of the crew members who were ready to embark on the mission, Shay the puddle jumper. Though the brilliant Canadian scientist initially wore a serious demeanor, he eventually cracked a smile of relief and joy, knowing that Ronan was safe. Plus, the prospect of getting to study the inner workings of the enemy ship provided him with the thrill that no roller coaster could. Rodek was accompanying Rodney, now prepared to lend his own expertise to breach the warship and rescue their friend. Though both had their history of tense relations, they would not let their differences stand in the way of protecting their fellow teammates. As the three of them prepared for departure, Colonel Shepard's voice crackled over their earpieces, "Good luck, and try not to get blown up." Despite the treacherous nature of the mission, Rodney and Rodek shared a faint smirk respectively at John's half-hearted attempt at humor. With their destination locked in, they hurtled towards the immense warship through the vast expanse of space, the comforting embrace of Atlantis puddle jumper doing little to soothe their nerves, with John, Samantha, Abraham, Tilla, Rodney, and Rodek preparing to board that wraith ship that Ronan was on. Their hearts pounded ferociously in their chests as the derelict husk of a craft loomed frighteningly closer, a monstrous leviathan drifting silently in the abyss. Precisely as they had planned, Rodney's team off Atlantis had managed to rescue Ronan and escape from the wraith ship, combining wit, brawn, and ironclad teamwork. The wraith ship retreated and headed back to the Pegasus constellation. Rodney now could return to that room with Rodek in where they have found this device and that first capsule. He realized this could change the course of their war with the Wraith forever. The entire team, including Ronan, breathed a collective sigh of relief now that they were free from the twisted menace of the Wraith Queens. But Rodney knew there was a much larger battle looming on the horizon, but he could not help but feel excited to see how this new device could turn the tide. But as McKay leaned in for a closer examination of the capsule, he noticed a tiny flicker within. But before departing Earth's orbit, Rodney had received an incoming message from Daniel Jackson about the location in where that next capsule was in another star system. "Rodney, I've deciphered the text on the Ancients capsule, and it indicates that the next capsule is hidden away in NGC 524, in the Pisces constellation, but it is approximately 90 light-years away. Except there is only one problem. With the distance to get there, the only ship that is capable of traveling there is the Atlantis, and once again you'll have to use the wormhole drive to get to NGC 524. Daniel Jackson's voice echoed through the speakers on Atlantis. Rodney's brow furrowed. He looked over at Colonel Shepard, who had a knowing look in his eyes. The Wraith had already left Earth's solar system with them facing defeat by these humans. It was time to find out what was out in the Pisces constellation. Those were the memories from taking on that super hive wraith ship and destroying it. Samantha Carter was commissioned to take over the USS George Hammond ship. The Apollo, Daedalus, and the U.S.S. George Hammond ship were heading back to the Pegasus constellation, while Atlantis was heading for the Pisces constellation to locate that next electronic capsule. It was then where Rodney, Tilla, Ronan, and Major Lorne found themselves preparing for the expedition to NGC 524, this time on a new mission with the primary focus to locate that next Ancients capsule. Their anticipation hung in the air, a palpable energy that surged through their veins. The Atlantis engines shrilled, groaning under the pressure and strain of its latest voyage, but it was sturdy nonetheless. This was a marvel of Ancients engineering after all, and so once again Rodney had to activate the wormhole drive to depart from Earth's solar system. Carson Beckett had once again examined Todd and found out why he had the need to feed on other life forms and had to make a few adjustments to the drug. It would suppress Todd's desire to feed for a longer period. Feeding was a necessary function for Todd, but Beckett, in his wisdom, had decided to find a way to control it and make it easier to manage. Todd, the Wraith Hive leader, felt gratitude for the doctor's efforts to help him. Beckett had withdrawn a needle from Todd's vein and had left the infirmary. So, Todd was heading to another star system aboard Atlantis and the only Wraith on the ship. Todd wanted to stop his brothers and sisters from feeding on other life forms, and so the two different Wraiths were starting a civil war against one another. But another reason he joined them was because of the replicators. They were a thorn in his back as the replicators were dangerous. He even helped assisting in destroying the replicators' home world, but the replicators had scattered throughout Pegasus, and now they were falling back on the Wraith, posing a fatal threat. To prevent another apocalyptic scenario, Todd wanted to prevent the apocalypse and to protect his race from the evils they themselves had unleashed. Some would consider it foolish, immature, and selfish, if not downright dangerous, to risk traveling with the very humans they'd once considered food.